Hello and welcome to the Ohio Department of Aging's pre-recorded training on cameras and HCBS settings. My name is Meredith Finley. This training is designed for PAA provider oversight staff and case managers. The agenda for the presentation includes reviewing where the provider memos page is on ODA's website. We'll talk about the guidance that was published related to cameras and HCBS settings. And finally, we'll talk about ODA's expectations for when case managers and provider oversight staff conduct their on-site visits to either see their consumers or to conduct an annual review of a provider. Here is the Department of Aging's website, and when you're on the home page, to access the provider memo section, you'll navigate to the top panel where you see news and events. And when you select on that page, it'll open up a new screen, and on the left panel, you'll see provider memos. And this is where the provider memos are published. We encourage you to subscribe to provider memos if you haven't already. You can visit the subscribe page here, or on the left you can select subscribe and then talk to your providers and remind them that they can subscribe to the provider memos as well. Next, we will go over the guidance around cameras and assisted living settings. This next slide reflects the actual provider memo regarding cameras and assisted living facilities and adult day. One thing that I want to note is that this guidance is not related to Esther's Law. If you have questions about Esther's Law, you can click on the link here. Esther's Law is intended for nursing facilities and cameras in resident rooms. This guidance has nothing to do with that rule. So if you do have questions around Esther's Law, please feel free to contact me. But what we're going to do is walk through this guidance. Although the memo is for providers, it can be used for your purposes for training, and that's the goal of this video, is to ensure that PAA staff, whether your case manager or provider oversight staff, that you understand your responsibility and your role in educating residents, your consumers, as well as providers, that they know that this guidance exists and that you can reference it moving forward. Now that you know where to find the guidance, let's walk through it together. Many of you are familiar with the HCBS settings final rule and know that cameras are not specifically mentioned in the rule. However, since COVID, we did find that a lot of assisted living facilities particularly did install cameras to monitor visitation and other safety measures, and have also decided to keep the cameras up. And so now it's important that providers are aware of these requirements that we're going to discuss, but also ensure that they are adhering to the overall intent or spirit of the settings rule. It's important that individuals receiving services do not feel uncomfortable, don't feel that their privacy is violated because of the cameras. A lot of cameras are used in nursing homes or in lockdown communities, and that makes them feel like an institution. So it's important that when you go to your next on-site annual review, or the next time you have a quarterly visit with your individual, that you ask whether or not individuals feel uncomfortable. For provider oversight staff, ask the administrator why the camera was installed in the first place. If you find out that the camera was installed to keep tabs on individuals, to supplement staffing levels, that's going to raise a red flag, and I ask that you bring that to my attention so that we can talk further. Generally, cameras that are in staffing areas like offices, or cameras that are only at the entrances or exits of facility, or in common areas like a cafe, don't raise concerns, but that doesn't mean that we still don't have to do our due diligence and ask why the cameras are there in the first place, and talk to your residents to make sure that they don't feel that their privacy is being violated. The previous slide, we talked about provider oversight staff talking with the administrator about the why of installing the camera. And if you determine that the only reason the cameras were installed were to protect individuals from abuse or neglect, we ask that you talk with the provider about whether or not they have tried these other interventions first. So did they increase staffing levels? Have they provided additional training above and beyond what is already required in our rule? Have they talked to individuals about the steps they can take to report concerns of abuse or neglect? And also empower individuals to advocate for themselves. You may need to include regional ombudsmen if individuals feel that they would be retaliated against if they spoke up about this. But the overall goal of ensuring that cameras are not used just for that purpose is because we don't want the cameras to be any type of substitute for staffing or to monitor individuals. So again, please talk with your administrator and bring anything that is concerning to my attention. The next two slides are going to talk about the steps that a provider needs to take if they are utilizing a camera in the facility. Again, we're asking that case management and provider oversight staff work together on ensuring that these things are in place as appropriate. And the first one being about signage. So case managers, if you're visiting a facility and you notice cameras and don't see any signs posted about it, please bring it to the attention of the provider oversight staff who can investigate it further. The guidance here doesn't specifically state where the signage needs to be, but we would expect that a best practice be at least at the entrance of the facility, but certainly if provider wants to put signage throughout the setting, that would be appropriate too. The provider needs to have policies and procedures that talk about where the cameras are located throughout the facility, the method for how any recordings will be destroyed after a specified period, and then how they will be stored until they are destroyed as well, and then who's going to have access to that information. So please review any policies that the provider has developed around this, and if they have not developed a policy, they will be required to do so after you conduct your on-site visit. The last component on the guidance around policies and procedures, and probably the most important, is around informed consent. Provider oversight staff will be requesting to review the informed consent to ensure that it includes all of the components listed here. If a provider does not have informed consent for the individuals in the facility or the adult day, then the provider will need to obtain informed consent. And we would ask that provider oversight staff notify the case managers just as a heads up that they will be signing this informed consent document, and that if they have any questions, if the individual has any questions, they can also call their case manager. But the informed consent has to ensure that it covers where the cameras are located in the setting, why the monitoring is taking place, when the recordings would be released, a statement that only appropriate staff have access, similar to the master key policy that is required for the HCBS settings rule, and then how long the recordings will be retained. Again, if the provider doesn't have this information, then they need to develop an informed consent and submit evidence to you that they have obtained signatures for all of the individuals at that setting. We are not expecting disciplinary action on this, but instead that you provide technical assistance and include any findings related to this in a summary report. To summarize the guidance, we want to ensure that providers are adhering to the spirit of the HCBS settings rule, that the setting doesn't feel like an institution, and that individuals don't feel like their privacy is being violated. Case managers, when you talk with your residents, please ask if they have any concerns around the cameras. Make a mental note that if you don't see any signage posted, that you talk to provider oversight staff. as well as anything else that may come up around the cameras during the visit. Provider oversight staff will be looking for these pieces as well during the on-site visit and checking that they meet all of the criteria. The HCBS settings checklist for provider oversight staff as well as for providers is going to be updated and will include the components that we just reviewed for cameras, and PINs will be updated as well. As always, feel free to email me if you have any questions, and you can direct providers to email me if they have questions as well. This concludes the pre-recorded training from the Ohio Department of Aging. Thank you.